Diplomatic efforts are underway to help relieve one of Syria's most beleaguered cities. After Syrian forces declared a so-called regime of calm on Friday, diplomats have been negotiating to include Aleppo in the proposed lull in fighting. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry joined dignitaries in Geneva on Monday, and UN envoy to Syria Staffan de Mistura met with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow on Tuesday. The talks come as more people are killed and injured Tuesday in a rocket attack on another hospital in Aleppo. This follows the airstrike on a hospital run by Doctors Without Borders that killed one of the city's last remaining pediatricians. We begin with CCTV's Roy Ruttenberg, who reports on that attack.
The closed-circuit footage from inside Al-Quds Hospital in Aleppo, Syria, showed a relative calm last week. And then this. At least 50 people are believed to have been killed in the strike, among them children and medical staff. Western governments quickly blamed Syrian forces. Damascus denied its warplanes targeted the hospital in the rebel-held district of the divided city. Government-held areas in the west of Aleppo have also come under attack, leaving dozens more dead. It's estimated some 250 civilians have been killed just in the last 10 days. Aleppo has been the epicenter of an escalation of violence that has undermined UN-led peace talks in recent weeks. A previous agreement between the various sides, reached in February, has unraveled, and fighting has resumed on a number of fronts. Thousands of kilometers away in Switzerland, there were renewed calls for a diplomatic solution.
Both sides, the opposition and the regime, have contributed to this chaos. And we are working over these next hours intensely in order to try to restore the cessation of hostilities and at the same time to raise the level of accountability that will accompany the day-to-day process of implementing this ceasefire.
The UN's top envoy for Syria was in Moscow on Tuesday, trying to get the Russians on board.
I'm looking forward to having now a serious discussion with one aspect that is clearly in my mind at the moment. We need to make sure that the cessation of hostilities is brought back on track.
The cooperation between the military is developing. The military of the two countries are in daily contact, and this cooperation, which now happens via video conferences, will become direct as in the upcoming days, in Geneva, a joint Russian-American Center for Response to Ceasefire regime violations will be established.
Aleppo is seen as a key component to any new peace deal. Syria and Russia say they are targeting al-Nusra Front fighters. The al-Qaeda affiliate was left out of previous agreements. Assad's critics, though, say his forces are striking civilians. Many in Aleppo are now asking, where are the Americans? The Free Syrian Army, one of the rebel groups backed by the U.S., has nearly 1,500 fighters inside the city. Meanwhile, U.S. President Barack Obama has ruled out so-called safe zones for civilians in rebel-held areas as impractical. But as he announced last week, the U.S. is sending 250 additional American military personnel to support the fight in Syria against ISIL or Daesh, an enemy he and the Syrian president share in common. Rowie Ruttenberg, CCTV in Washington.
Joining us now from New York is Stephen O'Brien. He's the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. Mr. O'Brien, thanks for joining us.
Hello.
We've just been listening to that report of that hospital being hit in Syria, the pediatric hospital, killing many, many people. Now we get news of another hospital being hit in Aleppo. What do you know about this latest attack?
Well, the latest attack in Aleppo that I have heard about is a hospital in western Aleppo where we have heard that 3 people have sadly lost their lives and about 15 injured. But of course we wait to receive confirmation whether those are the actual number who suffered from this dreadful attack. We condemn all attacks on all medical facilities. Of course, if there was no violence, we wouldn't have this problem, but there is a continuing a breach of the cessation of hostilities, and that is absolutely appalling for the people concerned, not least the people who are giving enormous service to those in need for medical treatments and injuries. And it is absolutely shameful that these acts have happened, because we know it's totally in breach of all human rights and in breach of all humanitarian law and norms. So it's critical that we recognise the effort that is made to try and bring the parties together under a cessation of hostilities to try and work out through dialogue a political solution. The only answer to the terrible suffering that's going on in Syria is a political solution. There will never be a humanitarian solution. We are there to try and meet the needs, the humanitarian needs of people who are being made to suffer terribly over such a long period of time through this crisis in Syria.
What is the humanitarian situation in the city of Aleppo right now?
It's dire. We've had reports of attacks and violence, both from airstrikes and ground shelling, both in western and in eastern Aleppo. As you know, the city, the largest area of population in Syria, has been subject to a continuing fight across lines and factions, and there are a continuing number of very serious outbreaks of violence in breach of the cessation of hostilities. So the humanitarian situation, whether it is to do with protection of innocent civilians caught up, whether it's women, children, young men, the elderly, all are subject to the most terrible violence, and we need to find a way of making sure they have enough shelter, protection, water, food, and access to medical treatment.
When you say you need to make sure that people get access to the basics, things like food, water, shelter, healthcare, are there UN convoys going through? Are they able to get through right now?
Well, of course, we are negotiating day and night, month in, month out, to make sure we have safe, unimpeded access to try and meet the humanitarian needs wherever they arise, whoever has those needs, and for whatever reason they have occurred. And so those negotiations continue. We put in the requests to the Syrian government to make sure that we can get through the various checkpoints, to put the convoys together, to load them up with the necessary humanitarian supplies. We try to make sure that the medical kits and the medical commodities are not removed from those convoys before we set off. We are making progress. In the month of April, we have managed to get through to a number of the areas which have previously been besieged since the beginning of the year. The UN and its partners in the convoys, whether that's the ICRC, the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and the UN itself, have been getting convoys through to Rastan, to the 4 towns, such as Foyer and Kafreh, Gabadani, and making sure that we get a coverage of about something like just under 500,000 people have been reached in the hard-to-reach areas, about 250,000 in the besieged areas where it's been very difficult to get access, and about 50,000 going across the lines. So that's been important progress, but compared to the scale of need, that is still woefully insufficient, and we know that we need to be able to get through more, but it does depend on being given safe, unimpeded access, which is absolutely what humanitarians have a right to demand, and we call for every day. And that's why we have all these negotiations with those who man the checkpoints, and we need to make sure we can get through safely.
Now, Mr. O'Brien, as you've been pointing out, a political solution is vital to resolve this crisis. The UN Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, has been holding talks in Moscow with Russian officials there. I want you to take a listen to some of what he said. Let's watch.
If, as we all hope, there will be some type of confirmation that even Aleppo will be returning into a cessation of hostility status, then what could imagine all of us is that meanwhile we will be restarting and pushing also for the humanitarian access and for the intra-Syrian talks. Everything is connected. Nothing is a condition, but everything is connected.
So there was Mr. Staffan de Mistura laying it all out there. He also said that May, the month of May, is going to be very important for Syria. What should we be looking for in this month?
Well, we want to see the cessation of hostilities hold and not be violated. We need to see Aleppo join that cessation of hostilities. Of course, any announcement about that, which we are told could be imminent, is hugely welcome. As the Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura just said, everything is connected in the sense that if you have a cessation of hostilities, when you have these negotiations to make sure that convoys loaded with the necessary humanitarian supplies can get across the various checkpoints and into the various besieged and hard to reach areas, these checkpoints will be numerous and they'll be manned by different factions, so you have to have negotiations with everybody. But the point about a cessation of hostilities is it not only gives the space for those who want to conduct political talks the chance to be able to get those started and to pursue them, but it also gives the people on the ground, the people who are affected by this crisis, the people whom we should have uppermost in our mind and whose interests we should be seeking to protect at all times, they have greater confidence that the plans that we have to get permission to get the convoys through, to supply people with great needs for food, water, shelter, medical treatments, those are going to more likely take place and to hold. So as I say, there isn't a conditionality, but there certainly is a connection, because it is all about people having the confidence that they can rely upon the sort of agreements that are being achieved in order to get the supplies through. That's why this is all so important, and it's also why there is a genuine need to find a way of getting a political dialogue going. And so everything we do is in support of and very much at one with the Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura and the talks and the particular parties who have influence on the other parties, making sure that all comes together. But at the same time, we as the humanitarians, to get the supplies through, we need to make sure that we are delivering as best we can with good negotiations that get us that safe, unimpeded access, so the truck drivers can get into their cabs with fully loaded trucks and get the supplies to the people who need it, whether of whatever type of needs they have, and indeed then to evacuate people from besieged and hard to reach areas who have medical treatments, whether they're long-term or recovering from injuries, to get the necessary treatment that they need in order to preserve life, to help people be protected, and to give them the chance going forward of hope, something which has been robbed from them now for a protracted period of time. And it is our job as humanitarians to do everything we can to give the people of Syria that future hope.